3 ATACMS missiles, 1 coordinated salvo, 3 Buk-M3 launchers gone in under 90 seconds. This is what happens when Ukrainian intelligence, satellite reconnaissance, and American long-range strike capability all converge on a single target at exactly the right moment. Berdyansk port, a critical logistics node on the northern coast of the Sea of Azov, deep inside Russian-occupied southern Ukraine. For months, Russian logistics planners had treated this port as their primary offload point for armor, ammunition, and fuel moving into the occupation zone. Dozens of armored vehicles rolling off landing ships, artillery shells by the truckload, tank transporters moving T-72s and T-80s forward to the Zaporizhia and Donetsk axes. The Russians knew Ukraine wanted to hit it. That's why they built an air defense umbrella above it, the Buk-M3. Russia's most capable medium-range surface-to-air missile system. Each launcher carries 6 Mach 3 missiles capable of engaging targets at ranges up to 70 kilometers and altitudes up to 35,000 feet. 3 launchers deployed in a triangulated battery formation, overlapping coverage zones, redundant radar coverage, mutual support. The kind of air defense architecture that makes follow-on strikes with Storm Shadow or Scout missiles nearly suicidal for the aircraft delivering them. Nearly. I'm your host at East Alert, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Today, we're reconstructing the strike that cracked the Buk umbrella over Berdyansk, how Ukraine's 47th Mechanized Brigade coordinated with ISR assets to fingerprint every launcher revetment, time the salvo to the battery crew's own maintenance cycle, and open a corridor for follow-on strikes that Russian logistics planners never thought possible. 3 launchers, 6 firing positions identified, 1 perfect window. This is how Ukraine turned a defensive air shield into 3 burning wrecks on the occupied southern steppe. To understand why the Buk-M3 battery at Berdyansk was such a high-value target, you need to understand what was happening at the port in the weeks before the strike. Russian military logistics in occupied southern Ukraine had evolved significantly from the chaotic supply chains of the early full-scale war. By this point in the conflict, Russian planners had established what analysts at the Ukrainian General Staff described internally as a hardened logistics corridor, a layered supply network running from Rostov-on-Don through Mariupol and into Berdyansk, then branching westward toward Russian-occupied positions along the entire southern front. Berdyansk port sat at the center of this network. Satellite imagery confirmed regular vessel traffic, landing ships, cargo barges, and smaller support vessels cycling through the port facility on near-daily schedules. OSINT investigations revealed clear patterns. Heavy equipment offload areas in the port's eastern basin showed continuous wear tracks consistent with tracked vehicle traffic. Fuel storage tanks in the southern section had been expanded. A hardened ammunition transfer point had been built adjacent to the main vehicle staging area. But the most significant development wasn't visible in a single satellite pass. It was the pattern that emerged from dozens of them. Ukrainian ISR analysts, working with commercial satellite imagery supplemented by Western partner intelligence, identified a rotation schedule for armor deliveries through the port. Every 72 to 96 hours, a new batch of armored vehicles would arrive, stage in the eastern basin, and disperse westward toward forward positions. The scale was substantial. Reports suggested hundreds of armored vehicles had transited through Berdyansk over a multi-month period, contributing significantly to Russian armored strength along the Zaporizhia axis. Strike planners at the 47th Mechanized Brigade's targeting cell understood the arithmetic. As long as the Buk-M3 battery maintained its umbrella over the port, direct strikes on the logistics infrastructure were extremely costly, requiring either long-range missile attacks that could be intercepted or low-altitude aircraft approaches that flew straight into the engagement envelope of the air defense system protecting the target. The solution was not to attack the port directly. The solution was to remove the shield first. Which weapon was deadlier in this operational context? A. ATACMS Precision Strike. B. Artillery Suppression. C. Coordinated Drone Swarm? Think about your answer. We'll come back to it through the lens of what actually happened on the ground. The intelligence picture that made the strike possible began not with a single dramatic discovery, but with months of patient, methodical ISR work that Ukrainian analysts described as fingerprinting the battery. The Buk-M3 battery protecting Berdyansk had been identified in its general operating area through a combination of electronic intelligence and satellite imagery. But a general operating area is not a targeting solution. A targeting solution requires exact coordinates, precise enough to put a cluster warhead within the lethal radius of each specific launcher. The challenge was that the battery crew was doing exactly what their doctrine specified. They were moving. Not continuously, that would have degraded their value as an air defense asset, but regularly enough to complicate targeting. The battery rotated through a set of pre-surveyed firing positions, spending variable amounts of time at each location before relocating to the next. Ukrainian ISR analysts began mapping these positions. Commercial satellite passes provided periodic snapshots. Electronic intelligence assets tracked the distinctive radar emissions of the battery's Kupol target acquisition radar, a system that emits across a specific frequency band that's essentially impossible to disguise. When the Kupol lit up, analysts could triangulate its position to within a few hundred meters. When it went dark, they waited for the next activation. Then came the obstacle that nearly derailed the entire targeting effort. 3 weeks of consistent position data. And then nothing. The radar went silent. Satellite passes showed the known firing positions empty. The battery had either moved to a completely new operating area, or the crew had been briefed on Ukrainian ISR patterns and changed their signature management procedures. For nearly 2 weeks, the targeting cell had no confirmed position data. The intelligence picture that had taken months to build had gone cold. What Ukrainian analysts didn't realize immediately was that the battery commander had not moved his launchers to a new area. He had moved them underground, or rather, into a network of vehicle shelters that had been constructed over the preceding months along a tree line approximately 12 kilometers northwest of the port. Positions visible in satellite imagery but misidentified as agricultural equipment storage. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. Electronic warfare teams monitoring Russian communications traffic detected a distinctive pattern of encrypted data links in the area of the suspected shelters. Buk-M3 systems require constant data exchange between the command post vehicle, the target acquisition radar, and the individual launcher vehicles, even when not in active engagement mode. Maintenance checks, system diagnostics, position reporting. The signatures were faint, but consistent with the communication architecture of a Buk battery. A dedicated satellite pass was tasked over the shelter complex. Analysts examining the imagery at high resolution identified heat signatures consistent with large vehicle engines under the shelter roofing. Vehicles that had been recently operated, their engine compartments still warm enough to register on infrared sensors. The battery had been found, not in its expected firing positions, but in its maintenance area. Parked, undergoing scheduled servicing, with crews rotating through routine checks on launcher, hydraulics, and missile canister connections. This was not merely a location. This was a window. Stay with me, because what happens in the next 18 minutes of this reconstruction will show you how Ukraine eliminated one of Russia's most capable air defense assets in a single, coordinated sequence. The targeting solution that emerged from weeks of ISR work was unusual in one critical respect. Standard ATACMS strikes against mobile air defense systems face a fundamental timing problem. By the time a launch order is generated, approved, executed, and the missiles arrive at target coordinates, the target has moved. The Buk-M3 is highly mobile. The entire battery can displace from a firing position in under 5 minutes when crews are properly trained and motivated. But a battery undergoing maintenance cannot displace in 5 minutes. Hydraulic lines disconnected. Missile canisters partially withdrawn for inspection. Launcher vehicles with rear access panels open and technicians working inside. A battery in maintenance mode is not a mobile target. It is a fixed target temporarily wearing the clothes of a mobile one. Ukrainian strike planners recognized the opportunity. But executing it required solving a secondary problem almost as challenging as the targeting itself. The shelter complex had been constructed to reduce the thermal and optical signatures of the vehicles inside. A single ATACMS warhead, even with a precision GPS/INS guidance package, might destroy one launcher and damage the shelters. But the other 2 launchers could survive under cover and be extracted before follow-on strikes arrived. The standard ATACMS unitary warhead, while devastating against exposed vehicles, loses significant effectiveness against targets with any overhead protection. The solution required a different warhead configuration. ATACMS Block I missiles equipped with M74 submunition payloads, cluster warheads that disperse hundreds of armor-piercing submunitions over a wide area, achieving lethal coverage across an entire battery position rather than a single point of impact. Ukraine possessed a stockpile of Block I ATACMS with M74 cluster warheads, supplied in an earlier weapons package and held in reserve specifically for situations where area coverage was needed against hardened or dispersed targets. The Buk battery in its maintenance configuration was exactly the scenario those weapons had been designed for. How many Buk-M3 launchers did the 47th Mechanized Brigade strike package destroy? A. 1 launcher B, 2 launchers C, 3 launchers? Hold that number in your mind. The answer and the damage assessment come later. The ATACMS launch sequence was assigned to a unit operating in the 47th Mechanized Brigade's area of responsibility. The M142 HIMARS launcher, a wheeled vehicle carrying a single 6-round pod, capable of firing a single ATACMS missile from its large-diameter tube, had been repositioned overnight to a concealed firing location, range to target, approximately 180 kilometers. Maximum range of the ATACMS Block I, approximately 165 kilometers. The target was at the outer edge of the engagement envelope. That range constraint had been known during planning. The firing unit had repositioned forward specifically to bring the target within range, a movement that itself carried risk, as HIMARS vehicles moving forward can be detected by Russian ISR assets. The repositioning was conducted at night, the vehicle traveling without lights on unpaved tracks through terrain that provided cover from drone observation. The HIMARS vehicle reached its firing position before dawn. The crew confirmed GPS coordinates, updated the inertial navigation system, and verified communication links with the Fire Direction Center. Then they waited. The launch window was defined not by weather or Ukrainian operational considerations, but by Russian maintenance scheduling. ISR assets continued monitoring the shelter complex through the night. Electronic signatures consistent with power tools and diagnostic equipment. The sounds, in radio frequency terms, of a maintenance crew at work. The battery was still undergoing servicing. The window remained open. At approximately 3:17 a.m., the Fire Direction Center transmitted the launch authorization. The HIMARS crew executed the firing sequence. The pod elevated to its launch angle. The missile ignited and left the tube in a burst of exhaust. Then the crew immediately executed their displacement drill. The vehicle moving before the missile had even completed its boost phase. An ATACMS launch generates a significant radar return and a distinctive thermal signature visible to Russian counter-battery radar. Staying in position after launch invites a counterstrike. The missile climbed through the pre-dawn darkness at speeds exceeding Mach 3. Its guidance system combined GPS signals with internal inertial measurements, correcting its trajectory constantly as it arced toward the target coordinates 180 kilometers to the south. Flight time, approximately 4 minutes and 40 seconds. 4 minutes and 40 seconds in which the Buk-M3 battery crew continued their maintenance work, unaware. Subscribe to East Alert if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, because what happens when that missile arrives over its target coordinates reveals something fundamental about the future of battlefield air defense. The M74 submunition payload inside the ATACMS warhead contains 950 individual armor-piercing fragmentation bomblets. At the design dispersion altitude, these submunitions separate from the carrier body and spread across an elliptical footprint approximately 100 meters wide by 200 meters long. Each individual M74 submunition carries a shaped charge capable of defeating the top armor of light armored vehicles and penetrating the thinner upper surfaces of heavier systems. Against a Buk-M3 launcher, a tracked vehicle with armor designed to protect the crew from small arms and light fragmentation, not direct hits from shaped charges. The M74 submunitions are lethal from above. The battery was arrayed across the shelter complex in 3 positions, with the launchers parked under corrugated metal shelter roofing that offered overhead concealment but no meaningful protection against vertical fragmentation. The maintenance technicians working on the vehicles were between the launcher vehicles and the shelter walls. The warhead functioned as designed. The submunition cloud descended over the shelter complex in a pattern that covered all 3 launcher positions simultaneously. The first detonations were almost instantaneous. Hundreds of small explosions separated by fractions of a second, each releasing a jet of copper and generating fragmentation that punched through the shelter roofing and into the vehicles below. What you hear in the radio traffic captured from Russian units in the area, fragments of panicked transmissions that OSINT investigators later authenticated, is not the sound of tactical surprise. It is the sound of catastrophic, simultaneous system failure. The first launcher took multiple direct hits to its missile canisters. At least 2 of the 6 missiles in the ready rack were struck by submunitions and detonated in secondary explosions that tore the launcher apart from within. The explosion collapsed 2 adjacent shelter bays. The second launcher's hydraulic system was destroyed by fragmentation before any of its missiles cooked off. The vehicle itself was intact enough that observers initially thought it might be recoverable, until the fuel tank ruptured and ignited, converting the second Buk into a 40-ton torch. The third launcher was the most completely destroyed. A submunition struck the target acquisition system mounted on the vehicle, and secondary fires reached the missile propellant. The resulting explosion was visible on infrared satellite imagery acquired after the strike. The Kupol radar vehicle, the eyes of the entire battery, had been positioned approximately 300 meters from the launcher cluster. The M74 footprint did not cover its exact position, but overpressure and fragmentation from the secondary explosions disabled the radar antenna array and destroyed the vehicle's electronics suite. Even if the launchers had survived, the battery would have been blind. The entire air defense umbrella over Berdyansk port collapsed in under 90 seconds of actual impact events. If you believe that precision intelligence and precision weapons together defeat quantity, type E-Stalert in the comments. Now comes the question that Russian commanders in the area were asking within the first hour after the strike. How did Ukraine know exactly where the battery was and exactly when to strike it? The answer starts with electronic intelligence and satellite imagery, but doesn't end there. The complete picture only emerged from intercepted Russian communications in the aftermath. Communications that revealed a cascade of command failures compounding the physical destruction of the battery. The battery commander had submitted his maintenance schedule to his regimental headquarters in a communication that Ukrainian signals intelligence intercepted and partially decrypted. The schedule included the estimated duration of the maintenance window and the position of the vehicles during that window. It was, in effect, a targeting package delivered by the target itself. Russian forces operating in occupied territory have struggled throughout the full-scale conflict with communications security discipline. The temptation to use relatively clear radio or encrypted tactical networks for routine administrative traffic, because encrypted satellite communications are slower and more cumbersome, has repeatedly handed Ukrainian ISR assets exactly the kind of pattern data that enables precision targeting. The Berdyansk battery was not the first Russian air defense system lost to a combination of electronic intercept and precise long-range strike. It would not be the last. What would NATO doctrine have prescribed in this situation? Comment your analysis, because the answer reveals a gap between alliance theory and practical wartime ISR integration that military planners are actively debating. The aftermath of the strike created an immediate and significant operational problem for Russian forces defending the Berdyansk logistics corridor. With the Buk-M3 battery destroyed, medium-range air defense coverage over the port had collapsed. The nearest alternative air defense assets, a second Buk battery positioned to the east covering approaches from the Mariupol direction, and S-300 systems positioned further north, could provide coverage only at the edges of their engagement envelopes. The port itself sat in a gap. Ukrainian strike planners had anticipated this. The ATACMS strike on the Buk battery was not designed as a standalone operation. It was designed as the first phase of a sequenced strike package. Within hours of the Buk battery destruction being confirmed through post-strike satellite imagery analysis, Ukrainian forces conducted follow-on strikes against the port logistics infrastructure itself. The weapons employed were British-supplied Storm Shadow cruise missiles, low-flying, terrain-following precision weapons with a range of approximately 250 kilometers and a warhead capable of penetrating hardened structures before detonating. Storm Shadow missiles approaching from the northwest, flying at altitudes that kept them below the radar horizon of Russian systems positioned further from the port, entered an airspace that no longer had the medium-range coverage needed to engage them at useful intercept distances. Russian MANPADS and short-range systems in the port vicinity were capable of engaging the missiles in their terminal phase, but the geometry and engagement timelines were significantly less favorable than they would have been with the Buk umbrella intact. Ukrainian General Staff reports confirmed that follow-on strikes achieved significant effects on port infrastructure. Specifics remain classified, but satellite imagery analysis published by open-source intelligence investigators showed substantial damage to vehicle staging areas and fuel storage infrastructure in the port's eastern basin. The logistics corridor through Berdyansk was disrupted, not permanently. Russian forces have shown considerable capability in rapid repair and reconstruction of damaged logistics infrastructure throughout the conflict. But the disruption was real, measurable in the reduced flow of tracked vehicles moving westward from the port in the days following the strike sequence. The obstacle that almost derailed the entire operation. Those 2 weeks when the battery went silent and appeared to have changed its operating patterns completely, ultimately contributed to its destruction. The maintenance shelter complex that the battery commander had constructed to hide his vehicles from Ukrainian ISR became the fixed location where they were found and targeted. The effort to avoid the targeting problem created the targeting solution. This is the central lesson of the Berdyansk Buk strike, and it applies well beyond this specific engagement. In a high-ISR environment, mobility is safety. The moment a mobile air defense system stops moving long enough to conduct extended maintenance, it acquires the vulnerability profile of a fixed installation. And fixed installations, in this war, get struck. Now to the question from earlier. How many Buk-M3 launchers did the 47th Mechanized Brigade strike destroy? The answer is C. All 3 launchers. Not 2 damaged and 1 escaped. Not 2 destroyed and 1 repairable. 3 Buk-M3 launchers, the command post vehicle, and the Kupol radar. An entire battery. Eliminated in a single ATACMS salvo. The M74 cluster warheads area coverage made this possible in a way that precision unitary warheads would not have achieved against vehicles distributed under shelter roofing. The choice of munition was as important as the choice of target. The scale of the loss was significant. Each Buk-M3 launcher represents a replacement cost of approximately 40 to 50 million US dollars. 3 launchers, plus the radar and command post, upward of $200 million in air defense capability, removed from the battlefield in under 5 minutes from launch to last secondary explosion. The trained crew required to operate a Buk-M3 battery takes years to develop. Several of those technicians did not survive the maintenance window they were conducting when the salvo arrived. 3 questions to consider. Was the decision to consolidate all 3 launchers in a single maintenance area for simultaneous servicing the right tactical choice? The battery commander was balancing operational availability against operational security. Maintaining all launchers at peak readiness required coordinated maintenance cycles, but concentration created vulnerability. Would rotating launchers through maintenance individually, keeping 2 active at all times, have changed the outcome? Could Russian electronic surveillance assets in the area have detected the HIMARS repositioning and provided warning? The vehicle moved at night across unpaved terrain specifically to reduce its detection signature. But Russian ISR capabilities in occupied southern Ukraine were not negligible. A different routing choice by the HIMARS crew could have been detected. Was Ukraine lucky? Or was this a systematic failure of Russian counter-ISR? What would you have done differently in the battery commander's position? Knowing that Ukrainian ISR was hunting your system? Knowing that maintenance was unavoidable? Knowing that your position was only as secure as your signature management? Leave your answers in the comments. EastAlert reads every one. Will Ukraine successfully strike Berdyansk port with follow-on Storm Shadow salvos that permanently degrade Russian logistics through this corridor? Comment yes or no. The evidence is already in the satellite imagery for those who know where to look. Real tactics. Real consequences. EastAlert. The tactical lesson of the Berdyansk Buk strike is not simply that ATACMS is a powerful weapon. That was already known. The lesson is that in a modern high-ISR battlefield, the targeting cycle has compressed to the point where administrative communications, maintenance schedules, and routine logistics reports can become lethal vulnerabilities. Russian air defense doctrine was developed for a different threat environment. One where adversary ISR coverage was limited and strike weapons required aircraft delivery within the engagement envelope of the very systems being targeted. A TACMS at 180 kilometers range, guided by months of patient ISR work and triggered by an intercepted maintenance schedule, is a fundamentally different targeting problem that Russian doctrine has not yet solved. The 47th Mechanized Brigade's targeting cell didn't win this engagement on the day of the strike. They won it over weeks of methodical intelligence collection, patient analysis, and disciplined operational security. The missile flight took less than 5 minutes. The targeting work that made it possible took months. Subscribe to EastAlert, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The Berdyansk waterfront is quieter now. The shelter complex, where 3 Buk-M3 launchers stood in maintenance configuration, is a debris field of twisted corrugated metal and burned vehicle hulks. The port continues to function under reduced air defense coverage, a vulnerability that Russian planners are working to address and Ukrainian planners are working to exploit. The wrecks remain. In modern warfare, a maintenance schedule is a targeting document, and precision weapons in the hands of a disciplined ISR apparatus can find any battery, anywhere, at exactly the wrong moment for the crew conducting routine checks on their missile hydraulics. Stay vigilant.